My daughter-in-law pointed a manicured finger at the front door and told me to go die in the street so she could finally have some peace. I just looked at her, fixed my old flannel shirt, and smiled a smile that didn't reach my eyes. I told her I understood perfectly, and that she should expect a special gift on her doorstep the very next morning. The next day, when a massive black truck pulled up during her birthday party, the look on her face was worth every single second of the hell she put me through. Before I tell you what was in that truck, hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments what city you are watching from. Believe me, you are going to want to stick around for the payoff. My name is Harold Bennett, but everyone used to call me Hal back when I was pouring concrete for half the skyline in Seattle. Now, at 72 years old, I am just an invisible ghost living in the guest house of the estate I built with my own 2 hands. It was a Friday evening. Rain was hammering against the roof. The kind of cold Washington rain that gets into your bones and stays there. I was sitting at my small kitchen table, stirring a bowl of lukewarm canned tomato soup. It was quiet. It was peaceful. And then the door exploded open. Tiffany did not knock. She never knocked. She slammed the door so hard the framed photo of my late wife on the wall rattled. A blast of cold air rushed in, carrying the scent of her expensive perfume. Something sharp and chemical that always made my nose itch. She was standing there in a white silk robe, her face twisted in that familiar look of disgust she saved exclusively for me. Behind her, standing in the shadows of the porch like a lost puppy, was my son, Brian. "Get out!" she screamed. She did not say hello. She did not ask how I was. She just threw a heavy black trash bag at me. It hit me square in the chest, knocking the spoon out of my hand. Red soup splattered across the table and onto my only clean pair of trousers. The bag landed with a thud on the floor, and the top spilled open. My heart stopped. Inside that bag was not trash. It was Martha's knitting supplies. Her favorite blue yarn. The unfinished sweater she was making for our grandson before she passed. Tiffany had raided the closet I asked her never to touch. I stood up, my knees popping. I am not a fast man anymore, but I moved as quickly as I could. I fell to my knees to gather the yarn balls that were rolling across the linoleum. "That is my wife's," I said, my voice shaking more than I wanted it to. "Why would you touch this?" Tiffany stepped into the room. She looked at me crawling on the floor like I was a cockroach she wanted to crush. "I need this space," she spat out. "I am turning this dump into a recording studio for my social media channel. I need the lighting. I need the space. And I do not need a senile old man smelling up the place with his old people food." I looked up at Brian. He was leaning against the door frame, refusing to make eye contact. He was looking at his shoes. Expensive leather loafers I probably paid for indirectly. "Brian," I said. "Brian, please. This is the guest house. We agreed I would stay here. I built this place, son." I looked at the floorboards under my hands. I remembered laying them down in 1985. I remembered driving the truck to Canada to hand-pick this white oak because I wanted the best for my family. Every nail in this structure I drove in myself. I built the main house for them to raise a family in, and I built this guest house so Martha and I could grow old watching our grandkids play in the yard. Now Martha was gone, and the house felt like a prison. Brian mumbled something I could barely hear. He said, "Tiffany needs the room, Dad." "It is just for a while. Maybe you can go to that motel on the highway." A motel? I stared at him. I gave him a $15 million trust fund, a debt-free mansion on Mercer Island, and he was suggesting I sleep in a roadside motel at 72 years old, because his wife wanted a room to make videos for the internet. I reached out to grab the photo of Martha that had fallen out of the bag. As my fingers touched the frame, Tiffany's foot came down. She kicked my hand. Hard. A sharp pain shot up my wrist. I gasped and pulled my hand back. The kick was not an accident. It was calculated. It was vicious. "Get up!" she shrieked. "You are pathetic. Look at you. You are just taking up space. You are useless. You contribute nothing to this household. You are a leech, Harold, a dirty old leech." I slowly got to my feet, cradling my throbbing hand. The physical pain was nothing compared to the burning in my chest. I looked at Brian again. Do something, I thought. Be the man I raised you to be. Defend your father. Stop her. But he just took a sip of his drink and turned his back to the wind, letting his wife assault me in the home I gave him. That was the moment it broke. That was the moment the father in me died and the businessman woke up. The man who negotiated with union bosses and sharks in the construction industry for 40 years blinked his eyes open. I looked at Tiffany, really looked at her. I saw the greed in her eyes, I saw the cruelty, and I saw the fear. She was desperate. You do not kick an old man out into the rain unless you are desperate. "I am not leaving tonight, Tiffany," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "It is pouring rain. I have nowhere to go." She laughed. It was a shrill, ugly sound. "I do not care," she said. "Sleep in your truck. Sleep in the park. Go die in the street for all I care. Just get out of my sight. If you are not gone by tomorrow morning, I am calling the cops and telling them you threatened me." Who do you think they will believe? The crying young mother or the crazy old man? She was right. She knew exactly how to play the victim. She had been doing it her whole life. I looked at the soup dripping off the table. I looked at the yarn on the floor. I looked at my son's back. And then I looked straight at her. "Okay," I said softly. She stopped yelling, surprised by my sudden surrender. "Okay," I repeated. "You win, Tiffany. I will not be a burden anymore. I will pack my things. I will be out of here by noon tomorrow." "Good," she sneered, crossing her arms. "Finally, you are making sense. Make sure you take all this junk with you. I want this place empty." I walked over to the closet and pulled out my old duffel bag. I started putting my few shirts into it. I could feel them watching me. They thought they had broken me. They thought I was retreating with my tail between my legs. They had no idea that I was already calculating the interest rate on the debt they were about to pay. I turned to them one last time before they left. Brian still wouldn't look at me. "Tiffany," I said. "What now?" she snapped. "Since I am leaving, and since tomorrow is your birthday, I want to give you a parting gift. No hard feelings, just something to remember me by." She rolled her eyes. "I do not want your garbage, Harold." "You will want this," I said. "It is something very special, something you have earned. It will arrive tomorrow around noon." "Whatever," she said, turning on her heel. "Just be gone." They walked out, leaving the door wide open to the storm. The wind blew rain onto my kitchen floor, soaking the yarn. I walked over and shut the door. I locked it. Then I sat back down in the silence. My hand was swelling up where she kicked me, turning a nasty shade of purple. I flexed my fingers. They still worked. Good. I did not sleep that night. I did not cry. I spent the next 8 hours making phone calls. I called people I had not spoken to in 10 years. I called my lawyer, James. I called my old foreman who still ran the heavy machinery yard. I called the bank. I looked around the small wooden house. I remembered the day I sanded these beams. I remembered Martha laughing as she painted the trim. They wanted to erase me. They wanted to pretend I never existed so they could sell this land and blow the money on cars and trips. They told me to go die in the street. Well, I thought, picking up the phone to dial the last number. I might be old, and I might be tired, but I am not dead yet. And before I go anywhere, I am going to remind them exactly whose name is on the deed to the ground they walk on. I packed the photo of Martha carefully in the bag. I whispered to her picture. "I am sorry, honey. I tried to be nice. I tried to keep the peace for the boy. But they kicked us, Martha. They kicked you. And nobody kicks us without getting a receipt." By the time the sun came up, the storm had passed, but a new one was brewing. I watched through the window as caterers began arriving at the main house to set up for Tiffany's birthday brunch. Balloons, flowers, a white tent. It looked expensive. I drank my black coffee and waited. I had one more stop to make before the party started. I grabbed my keys and walked out to my rusted Ford pickup truck. It was time to go get their gift. I drove my 1990 Ford F-150 exactly 400 yards away from the guest house. I did not leave the property. I could not bring myself to leave the land I had purchased 30 years ago, when this entire area was nothing but trees and mud. Instead, I parked the truck at the edge of the dense pine forest that bordered the estate. Technically, this strip of land still belonged to me on an old deed that the county clerk had never consolidated with the main lot. It was my little secret, a small slice of sovereignty that Tiffany and Brian knew nothing about. I turned off the engine. The silence of the woods was heavy. The rain drummed against the metal roof of the cab, a sound that used to comfort me when I was a young foreman sleeping on job sites. But tonight, it sounded like gravel being thrown at a coffin. I reclined the seat as far back as it would go, but the old leather was stiff and the metal springs dug into my lower back. At 72 years old, your body does not forgive you for sleeping in a cold truck. My hip ached with a dull, throbbing rhythm that matched the beating of my heart. I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to preserve what little body heat I had left. I could see the lights of the main house through the trees. It glowed like a warm, golden lantern in the darkness. I saw the silhouette of my son walking past the living room window. He was probably pouring another drink. I wondered if he felt any guilt. I wondered if he looked at the empty guest house and felt a pang of shame for throwing his own father out into a storm. Or maybe he was just relieved. Maybe he was happy that the old man was finally gone, so he wouldn't have to face the reminder of his own failures. Sleep did not come. Instead, memories came. I remembered holding Brian in this very truck when he was 5 years old, letting him pretend to steer while I worked the pedals. I remembered telling him that a man's job is to protect his family and his home. I had failed. I had protected the assets, but I had failed to build a man. I sat there shivering until my teeth chattered, watching the house I built keep the people who hated me warm. Morning arrived slowly. The gray light filtered through the pine branches, revealing the condensation on the inside of my windows. My joints felt like they were filled with cement. I sat up and rubbed my face, feeling the rough stubble on my chin. I looked terrible. My eyes were red, my clothes were wrinkled, and I smelled like stale coffee and old upholstery. Perfect. This was exactly what Tiffany wanted. She wanted me to look like a derelict. Around 8 in the morning, I saw movement near the main gate. I rolled down my window just a crack to let in some fresh air. The air was crisp and smelled of wet pine needles. Down the long driveway, I saw Mrs. Collins walking her golden retriever. Mrs. Collins was a sweet woman, the widow of a dentist who had lived next door for 15 years. She always waved at me when I was gardening. She stopped near the front gate, looking confused. She must have seen my truck parked awkwardly in the tree line instead of in the garage. Just then, the front door of the main house opened. Tiffany stepped out. Even at this hour, she was fully made up. She wore a white cashmere sweater and tight yoga pants, holding a ceramic mug with both hands. She looked the picture of suburban perfection. She waved at Mrs. Collins with a bright, enthusiastic energy that made my stomach turn. "Good morning, Mrs. Collins," Tiffany called out. Her voice carried clearly across the wet lawn. Mrs. Collins pointed toward the woods where I was parked. "Good morning, dear. Is everything all right? I see Harold's truck parked out there in the mud. Is he okay?" I leaned forward, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. This was it. This was the moment she would have to explain why her father-in-law was homeless. Tiffany let out a light, musical laugh. "Oh, you know Hal. He is having one of his episodes again." "Episodes?" Mrs. Collins asked, her voice filled with concern. "Yes," Tiffany sighed, putting on a performance worthy of an Oscar. "He got confused last night. He started talking about the old days, thinking he was back on a construction site. He insisted on sleeping in the truck to guard the materials. We tried to get him inside. Brian and I begged him, but he just wouldn't listen. He thinks he is camping. The doctor said it is best not to force him when he gets like this. It is just the dementia progressing, I am afraid." Dementia. I felt the blood rush to my face. I did not have dementia. I could recite the current stock price of every major steel company in America. I could calculate the load-bearing capacity of a bridge in my head. But to her, I was just a senile old prop to be managed. "Oh, that is heartbreaking, Mrs." Collins said, shaking her head. "He used to be such a sharp man. Poor Brian. It must be so hard for you two to take care of him." "It is a burden, but what can we do?" Tiffany said, wiping a fake tear from her cheek. "We love him. We just want him to be safe. Honestly, we are thinking about finding a facility that can give him the 24-hour care he needs. Somewhere he can be comfortable and not, sleep in the woods like a wild animal." "You are a saint, Tiffany," Mrs. Collins said. "Really, you are." I slowly rolled the window up. I could not listen to another word. I leaned my head back against the headrest and closed my eyes. She was not just kicking me out. She was rewriting my history. She was painting a picture of a helpless, crazy old man who needed to be put away for his own good. If I disappeared today, the whole neighborhood would just nod and say it was for the best. Rage is a funny thing. Sometimes it burns hot and fast, like a gasoline fire. But this rage was different. This was cold. It was heavy. It settled in my gut like a stone. She called me senile. She called me a burden. She stood there on the property I paid for, drinking coffee I paid for, wearing clothes I paid for, and told the world I was losing my mind. I looked at the dashboard clock. 8:15. The banks would open at 9. The county clerk's office opened at 8:30. I reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a small notepad and a pen. My hand was trembling, not from the cold anymore, but from adrenaline. I wrote down 3 words: dignity, truth, gift. I started the engine. The old truck roared to life, a loud, defiant sound that shattered the morning quiet. I saw Tiffany jump and look toward the woods. She frowned, annoyance flashing across her face before she quickly composed herself and smiled back at Mrs. Collins. I put the truck into gear. I did not drive toward the house. I drove away. I drove slowly past them, staring straight ahead, not acknowledging their existence. I saw Mrs. Collins wave at me with pity in her eyes. I saw Tiffany glare at me with hatred. Let her think I am going to the motel, I thought. Let her think I am defeated. Let her think she has won. Because when I come back up this driveway, I won't be driving a pickup truck. And I won't be Hal, the senile old man. I turned onto the main road, the tires humming against the asphalt. The heater finally kicked in, blowing warm air onto my frozen feet. I took a deep breath. The sadness was gone. The loneliness was gone. All that was left was the mission. I had 24 hours to prepare the greatest birthday present Tiffany had ever received. And I was going to make sure she never forgot it. I watched from down the street as Tiffany's white Range Rover pulled out of the driveway. She was driving fast, likely late for her appointment at the luxury nail salon in Bellevue. She needed to look perfect for her party, and nothing, not even kicking her father-in-law out onto the street, was going to interrupt her beauty routine. I waited until her taillights disappeared around the curve of the road before I put my truck into gear. I did not pull into the driveway. I parked 2 houses down in front of a construction site where no one would notice an old Ford truck. I pulled my cap down low and walked quickly along the hedgerow. I needed my heart medication. In the chaos of last night, I had left the refill bottle in the study of the main house. Without those pills, the stress of the last 24 hours could literally kill me. And I refused to die before I taught them a lesson. I walked around to the back of the house, avoiding the security cameras I knew Brian had installed last month. He said they were for safety, but now I knew they were just another way to monitor the perimeter of his crumbling kingdom. I reached the back patio door. It was locked, of course. Tiffany would have double-checked it. But she forgot one thing. 30 years ago, when I first built this house, I had a habit of locking myself out. Martha used to laugh at me every time. So, I hid a spare brass key under a heavy terracotta pot in the corner of the patio, beneath a dense fern. Brian never watered the plants, so the fern was long dead, just brown, crispy leaves, but the pot was still there. I crouched down, my knees cracking, and tilted the heavy clay pot. There it was, dull and tarnished after 3 decades, but it was there. The key to my castle. My hand shook as I slid the key into the lock. It turned with a satisfying click. I slipped inside and closed the door softly behind me. The silence in the house was suffocating. It smelled of lemon verbena and bleach, a sterile, chemical smell that tried too hard to cover up the fact that no one actually lived here. They just existed. I walked down the hallway toward the study. The walls felt wrong. I stopped. Yesterday, this hallway was lined with family photos. Pictures of Martha holding Brian when he was a baby. Pictures of our trips to the Grand Canyon. Pictures of my retirement party. Now, the walls were bare. I looked down at the floor. There, stacked in a pile against the baseboard, were the frames. They were turned face down. Tiffany had taken them down. She had stripped the walls. In their place hung large, meaningless canvases of abstract shapes. Gray squares, black lines, cold, unfeeling art that cost a fortune but meant absolutely nothing. She had erased us. In less than 12 hours, she had scrubbed 30 years of history from these walls, to make the house look like a staging showroom. I felt a lump rise in my throat, but I swallowed it down. I walked into the study. This used to be my sanctuary. Dark mahogany wood, leather chairs, the smell of old paper and pipe tobacco. Now, it was a mess. Boxes were stacked everywhere. I went to the desk to look for my medicine. The drawers were half open. Papers were spilling out. That was unlike Brian. Brian was meticulous, almost obsessive about tidiness. For him to leave a desk like this meant he was unraveling. I found my pill bottle under a stack of magazines, but as I reached for it, something else caught my eye. It was a letter with a bright red stamp on the envelope. Final notice. I froze. I picked it up. It was addressed to Brian. I should not have opened it, privacy laws and all that, but I was the man who paid for this roof, so I tore it open. It was a foreclosure warning from the bank. The mortgage payments were 6 months behind. My hands started to sweat. How was this possible? I had given them the house debt-free. That meant Brian had taken out a second mortgage, a massive one, against the equity I had built up for decades. I started digging through the pile on the desk. I forgot about the time. I forgot about Tiffany coming back. I needed to know the truth. I found credit card statements, American Express, Visa, MasterCard, all in Tiffany's name. The numbers were staggering. Neiman Marcus, $10,000. Trip to Cabo, $15,000. Private club membership, $5,000. The total revolving debt on just the cards was over $100,000. Then I found the smoking gun. Hidden at the bottom of the drawer, crumpled up like someone had tried to throw it away but was too scared to let go of the evidence. It was a statement from an offshore online gambling site. I smoothed out the paper on the desk. Rows and rows of transactions. -5,000. -10,000. -20,000. Brian, my quiet, obedient son who never took risks in business, had been gambling away his inheritance at virtual poker tables. The bottom line was printed in bold black ink. Total outstanding balance, $250,000. I sat down in my old leather chair. The air left my lungs. $350,000 in debt, plus a defaulted mortgage. Suddenly, everything made sense. The cruelty, the rush to get me out, the studio Tiffany wanted to build. It was all a lie. They did not need a studio. They needed to stage the house to sell it. They were drowning. They were broke. And the only thing standing between them and total financial ruin was me. Specifically, the life estate clause. I knew the law, as long as I held the right to live on the property. The property value was significantly lower, because no buyer wants to purchase a mansion that comes with an old man living in the backyard. No bank would approve a sale until I signed a quitclaim deed, releasing my rights. That was why they kicked me out. That was why Tiffany screamed at me. That was why they treated me like garbage. They were terrified. The sharks were circling, and they were trying to throw me overboard to save themselves. I looked at the papers in my hand. I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. For years, I wondered if I was just a grumpy old man who couldn't connect with the younger generation. I wondered if I was the problem. But looking at these numbers, I realized I wasn't the problem. I was the piggy bank. And the piggy bank was finally closed. I heard the faint sound of an engine in the driveway. Tiffany was back. I quickly folded the bank statements and the gambling records and shoved them into the inside pocket of my jacket. I grabbed my heart medication. I stood up and looked around the room one last time. I looked at the expensive, unpaid-for furniture. I looked at the chaos of their lives hidden behind closed doors. They wanted to sell my home to pay for their mistakes. They wanted to erase Martha's memory to save their own skins. I slipped out the back door just as I heard the front door code being punched in. I locked the door behind me and slid the key back under the fern. I walked quickly toward the woods, my heart pounding not from fear, but from the thrill of the hunt. I had came here feeling like a victim. I was leaving like a judge who had just seen the evidence. I touched the pocket of my jacket where the papers sat against my chest. They thought they were evicted a helpless old man. They had no idea they had just handed the prosecutor the murder weapon. I reached my truck, climbed in, and started the engine. I had work to do. The bank opened in 20 minutes, and I intended to be their first customer. I stood frozen in the middle of the living room as the front door swung open. There was no time to run, no time to hide the papers I had just shoved into my jacket pocket. Tiffany walked in, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. She stopped dead when she saw me, her eyes narrowing instantly into slits of pure venom. She did not look surprised to find an intruder in her home. She looked annoyed, like she had found a stain on the carpet she thought she had already cleaned. "What are you doing here?" she hissed, dropping her purse onto the sofa. "I thought I told you to stay out of my sight until you were gone." I did not answer immediately. I could feel the sharp edges of the foreclosure notice and the gambling debts pressing against my ribs through the thin fabric of my jacket. My heart was hammering against them. Not from fear of her, but from the sheer weight of the secrets I was carrying. "I came to get my medicine," I said, keeping my voice low. "And I found something else instead." Her eyes darted to my chest, spotting the corner of the envelope sticking out of my pocket. She recognized the bank logo instantly. For a second, just a split second, I saw a flash of panic cross her face. But Tiffany was a master of deflection. The panic vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a wave of aggressive entitlement. She marched over to me and snatched the papers from my pocket before I could stop her. She didn't read them. She didn't need to. She crumpled them in her manicured fist. "You have no right to snoop through our mail," she spat. "This is a federal offense, Harold. I could have you arrested for this. You are losing the house, Tiffany," I said, ignoring her threat. "You and Brian are $250,000 in debt. You haven't paid the mortgage in 6 months." "So what?" she screamed, her voice echoing off the high ceilings and the empty walls where my family photos used to hang. "So what if we are behind? Do you know how expensive it is to maintain this mausoleum you built? The heating bills alone are enough to bankrupt a normal family. And we can't sell it. We can't refinance it. Do you know why? Because of you." She poked a finger into my chest, right where the papers had been. "Because you are like a millstone around our necks, Harold. No one wants to buy a property with a life estate attached to it. No one wants to buy a mansion that comes with a grumpy, dying old man living in the shed out back. You are the reason we are drowning. You are the reason Brian drinks. You are the reason we have to gamble just to try and make ends meet." It was staggering. The mental gymnastics she was performing to blame me for her credit card bills and Brian's gambling addiction were impressive in a twisted sort of way. She took a step back, her chest heaving, looking for something else to hurt me with. Her eyes scanned the room, desperate for a weapon. Then, her gaze landed on the fireplace mantel. It was the only spot in the room she hadn't cleared out yet. Right in the center, sitting on the dark wood, was a simple, polished brass urn. It wasn't flashy. It was elegant. Inside rested the ashes of Martha, the woman who had made this house a home. I had asked Brian to keep it there because Martha loved the fire. She loved the warmth. Tiffany walked over to the mantel. A cruel smile curled on her lips. "And this thing," she said, pointing at the urn with disgust. "Do you have any idea how creepy this is? I had a real estate agent in here last week for a private showing, off the books. She told me the house has bad energy. She said it feels like a crypt." "Don't you touch that," I warned, my voice dropping an octave. She picked it up. She held it carelessly in one hand, weighing it like it was a piece of cheap decor she found at a yard sale. "It is bad luck, Harold. It is dead energy. Literally. No wonder Brian can't win a hand of poker. No wonder my social media following is stagnant. We are living with a ghost watching us." "Put it down, Tiffany," I said, taking a step forward. My hands were clenched into fists at my sides. "Or what?" she challenged, tossing the urn slightly in the air and catching it. "What are you going to do, old man? Are you going to hit me? Go ahead, hit me. I will own your pension before you can blink." She turned toward the gas fireplace. She reached for the switch on the wall. Flames erupted behind the glass screen, blue and orange dancing hungrily. "I think it is time to do a spiritual cleansing," she said, holding the urn out toward the fire. "Maybe if we get rid of the bad juju, our luck will change." Ash to ash, right? "No!" I roared. I lunged across the room. I didn't think. I didn't calculate. I just moved on pure instinct. I covered the distance between us in 2 strides, ignoring the screaming pain in my bad hip. I reached for the urn just as she swung her arm back to toss it. My hand clamped around her wrist. She shrieked, surprised by my speed. She yanked her arm back violently. The brass urn slipped from her fingers. Time seemed to slow down. I watched it fall. I saw the light of the fire reflecting off the polished metal. I dove for it, trying to catch it before it hit the stone hearth. I missed the catch, but I broke the fall. The urn hit my knee, then clattered onto the floor. It didn't break. Brass is tough, tougher than people. But the lid, the heavy, threaded lid, popped off from the impact. A gray cloud puffed up into the air. A pile of coarse, gray ash spilled out onto the hardwood floor and onto my shoes. As I fell to my knees to grab the urn, the dust settled on my jacket. It settled on my worn flannel shirt. It coated my hands. Silence fell over the room. The only sound was the hissing of the gas fire. I froze. I looked down at the gray dust on my trembling hands. This was Martha. This was the woman I danced with at our wedding. This was the woman who held my hand when I broke my leg on the job site. This was the woman who knit sweaters for a grandson who now gambled away her legacy. Tiffany stood over me. She didn't look horrified. She didn't look sorry. She looked at her boots. "Gross," she said, wrinkling her nose. "Look at that mess. You got dead person all over the floor. Get the vacuum, Harold. Clean this up before it stains the rug." Something inside me snapped. It wasn't a loud snap. It was the quiet sound of a final tether being cut. For years, I had tried to be the peacemaker. I had tried to be the understanding father. I had swallowed my pride. I had endured the insults. I had let them push me into the shadows because I thought that was what family did. You sacrificed. You forgave. But looking at the ash on my vest, I realized something. Family doesn't make you kneel in the dirt. Family doesn't spit on the memory of the dead. I slowly scooped the spilled ash back into the urn with my bare hands. I was gentle. I was reverent. I screwed the lid back on, tightening it until my knuckles turned white. I stood up. I brushed the remaining gray dust from my pants, but I left the dust on my vest. I wanted to feel it there. I wanted Martha to be with me for what came next. I looked at Tiffany. For the first time in 10 years, I didn't see my son's wife. I didn't see a family member. I saw a liability. I saw a structural flaw in the foundation that needed to be demolished. Tiffany took a step back. The look in my eyes must have changed because the arrogance on her face faltered. She looked unsettled. "What?" she said, her voice wavering slightly. "Why are you looking at me like that? Stop being dramatic. Just clean it up and get out." I didn't say a word. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. Arguing is for people who think there is still a chance for resolution. Arguing is for people who care what the other person thinks. I didn't care anymore. I tucked the urn under my arm, holding it tight against my side like a football. I turned my back on her. "Hey!" she yelled, her confidence returning as I walked away. "I am talking to you. Don't you dare walk away from me. You clean this mess up right now." I walked to the back door. I unlocked it. "Harold!" she screamed. "If you walk out that door, don't you dare come back for the party tomorrow. I don't want to see your face." I opened the door. The cold air hit me, cooling the sweat on my forehead. I stepped out. I didn't look back. I didn't slam the door. I closed it gently, with a soft click. As I walked back to the woods where my truck was hidden, a strange feeling washed over me. I wasn't tired anymore. The pain in my hip was gone. The fog in my head was gone. I felt sharp. I felt dangerous. She wanted a party. She wanted a celebration. Well, I was going to give her one. I climbed into my truck and placed Martha's urn on the passenger seat. I buckled the seatbelt around it. "Hang on, Martha," I whispered, starting the engine. "We have a meeting with the bank. And then, we have a birthday party to crash." The hunter was awake, and the trap was about to be sprung. The drive into downtown Seattle was a blur of gray rain and red taillights. I navigated the familiar streets with a kind of muscle memory that bypassed my conscious thought. I had poured the concrete for half the skyscrapers in this city, including the 76-story Columbia Center where my lawyer, James Caldwell, kept his office on the top floor. I pulled my battered Ford truck up to the valet stand right behind a sleek black Mercedes. The young valet in the red vest looked at my rusted fender and the mud on my tires with undisguised disdain. He hesitated, clearly wondering if he should tell me to move along. I stepped out, my boots heavy on the wet pavement, and tossed him the keys along with a crisp $50 bill. I told him to keep it close and not to scratch the rust because it gave the truck character. He took the money and shut his mouth, which is how most things work in this city. I took the elevator up, watching the floor numbers climb. With every passing floor, I felt a layer of the sad, pathetic old man falling away. When the doors opened onto the 76th floor, I walked past the reception desk without stopping. The receptionist, a young woman who looked like she cost more to maintain than my truck, started to protest, but I pushed open the double mahogany doors to the corner office before she could pick up the phone. James was standing by the window, looking out at the Puget Sound. He turned around, his smile ready, but it vanished the moment he saw me. James and I go back 40 years. We served in the same unit overseas, and he was the legal shark who helped me build my construction empire. He knew me when I was invincible. Seeing me now, in a flannel shirt stained with my wife's ashes, unshaven and hollow-eyed, shook him. "Harold," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Good God, man. What happened to you? You look like you went 12 rounds with a freight train." I didn't shake his hand. I walked straight to one of the leather wingback chairs and sat down. The comfort of the chair felt alien after sleeping in the cab of my truck. I motioned for him to sit. I told him everything. I told him about the eviction. I told him about the soup on the floor. I told him about the knitting supplies in the trash. And then, with a voice that was cold and flat, I told him about the urn. I told him how Tiffany had treated Martha's remains like hazardous waste. James listened in silence. His face went from concern to pale, and then to a shade of red I hadn't seen since we were in the jungle together. By the time I finished, his hands were trembling, not from fear, but from a rage that matched my own. He slammed his hand down on the desk. "This is monstrous, Hal. This is elder abuse, plain and simple. I will have a restraining order on her by noon. We will file a civil suit for emotional distress. I can get an emergency injunction to stop them from selling the property. We will tie them up in court for 5 years. They won't be able to sell a stick of furniture without a judge's permission." I looked at him. I respected James. He was a good man who believed in the system. But the system was slow. The system was polite. I didn't want polite. I didn't want a judge to scold them in 6 months. I wanted them to feel the ground crumble beneath their feet today. "No, James," I said, cutting him off. "No lawsuits. No family court. That is too slow. And frankly, I don't want to be the victim in a courtroom, crying about how my feelings were hurt." James looked confused. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Then what do you want to do, Hal? If we don't sue, they sell the house. They have the power of attorney you signed last year, unless we revoke it immediately." I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket and pulled out the crumpled papers I had stolen from Brian's desk. I smoothed them out on the polished wood of James's desk. The foreclosure notice, the gambling debts, the credit card statements. "They are broke, James. They are drowning. They aren't selling the house because they want to. They are selling it because the sharks are circling. Brian owes $250,000 to offshore gambling sites, and the bank is 30 days away from taking the keys." James picked up the papers, scanning them quickly. His lawyer eyes assessed the damage in seconds. "This is bad," he muttered. "They are insolvent. If the bank forecloses, you lose your life estate rights anyway. The bank's lien supersedes your residency agreement. You will be on the street regardless." I leaned forward. "That is why we are going to beat the bank to it. I want you to use the trust," I said. James froze. He looked up at me, his eyes wide. The Bennett family trust. The secret weapon I had created 20 years ago when I sold my company. I had put $15 million into a blind trust locked away in conservative bonds. I had told everyone, including Brian, that the money was gone, tied up in failed investments. I wanted my son to build his own life. I wanted him to learn the value of $1 the way I had. I wanted him to struggle, because struggle builds character. I was wrong. Struggle didn't build character in Brian. It revealed the lack of it. "Unlock it," I said. "How? Are you sure?" James asked softly. "You swore you wouldn't touch that money until you were 90. You said it was for your great-grandchildren." "My son tried to throw away my wife's ashes, James. I don't have a son anymore. And I don't care about the future right now. I care about justice." I pointed a callous finger at the foreclosure notice. "Call the bank. Call the private lenders holding Brian's gambling notes. I want to buy the debt. All of it." I want to become the primary lien holder on the estate. I want to own the mortgage, the credit card debt, the personal loans. I want to own every single dollar that boy owes to this world." James stared at me for a long moment. Then, a slow, sharp smile spread across his face. He understood. He saw the brilliance of it. If I sued them, I was just a disgruntled father. But if I bought the debt, I was the bank. And the bank doesn't need to be polite. The bank doesn't need to ask for permission to enter the property. The bank owns the property. "I want to execute an emergency foreclosure," I continued, my voice steady and hard, "based on the violation of the moral clause in the original deed and the default on payments. Since I will be the lender, I can accelerate the process. I want them out in 24 hours. It will cost you a premium to buy those notes quickly," James warned, reaching for his phone. "The sharks will want cash on the barrelhead." "Pay them," I said. "I don't care what it costs. Just get me the papers. I want to walk into that birthday party tomorrow not as a guest and not as a father. I want to walk in as the landlord who is evicting a couple of squatters." James pressed the intercom button. "Sarah, get the president of First National on the line. And get the legal team in here. We are acquiring a distressed asset portfolio. Now." He looked back at me. "Hal, this is the nuclear option. Once you do this, there is no going back. You will destroy them financially. They will have nothing." I looked out the window at the gray sky. I thought about Tiffany laughing as she kicked my hand. I thought about Brian turning his back on me. They had already destroyed the only thing that mattered, the bond of family. All I was doing was taking back the bricks and mortar. "Do it," I said. For the next 4 hours, I sat in that office and watched the machinery of wealth turn. It was terrifying and beautiful. I signed transfer documents. I authorized wire transfers that would make a normal man faint. I watched as $15 million of sleeping power woke up and stretched its claws. By 2 in the afternoon, the fax machine spit out the confirmation. The deed of trust was assigned to a holding company named Martha's Justice, LLC. I was no longer Harold the pensioner. I was Harold the owner. I held the paper that said my son lived in my house by my mercy, and my mercy had just run out. James handed me the final stack of documents in a thick blue folder. He also handed me a heavy, iron-handled sledgehammer from his office closet, a souvenir from a demolition case we won years ago. "You might need this," he said, his eyes twinkling with a grim satisfaction, "for the emotional weight of the argument." I took the hammer. It felt good in my hand, heavy, real. It felt like the tools I used to build my life, and now it would be the tool I used to dismantle their lies. I stood up. I felt taller. The ache in my joints was masked by the adrenaline of the kill. "Thank you, James," I said. "Give them hell, Hal," he replied. I took the elevator down to the street. The rain had stopped. I walked to my truck, tossed the blue folder and the sledgehammer onto the passenger seat next to Martha's urn. I patted the lid of the urn. "We got them, honey," I whispered. "We got them." I started the engine. I had the legal power. I had the financial power. Now, all I had to do was wait for the party. I drove out of the city, leaving the skyline behind, heading back to the quiet, expensive suburbs where my ungrateful family was currently blowing up balloons, completely unaware that the man they threw out with the trash was coming back to foreclose on their entire existence. We left the high-rise and drove 3 blocks to a building that looked more like a fortress than an office. This was where the private equity sharks swam. These were not the kind of bankers who gave you a lollipop when you opened a checking account. These were the people who bought bad debt, squeezed every cent out of desperate borrowers, and then discarded the husks. They held the note on Brian's gambling debt. James had set up the meeting on the way over. When we walked into the conference room, 2 men in sharp Italian suits were already waiting. They looked at my flannel shirt and my work boots with amused skepticism. They probably thought I was the janitor coming to empty the trash, not the man coming to buy their portfolio. "Sit down, gentlemen," James said, taking charge. His voice was smooth, professional, the voice of a man who builds $600 an hour. The younger of the 2 suits slid a folder across the polished black table. "We looked into this Brian Bennett's financials after you called. Honestly, we were about to sell this debt to a collection agency for pennies. The guy is insolvent. He has no assets in his name, just a mountain of credit card bills, and a dad who refuses to die and free up the real estate." I sat perfectly still. My hands were folded on the table. I didn't flinch when he talked about me refusing to die. That was exactly what Brian had told them. That was the collateral he had offered them. My death. "I am not interested in your commentary," I said, my voice rough like gravel. "I am interested in the note. You hold $250,000 in unsecured gambling debt." The older suit leaned back, tapping a gold pen on the table. "We do. And with interest and penalties, the figure is closer to 300,000. But like my associate said, collecting from a stone is difficult work. If you are looking to buy this debt, you should know you are buying a lemon." I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a cashier's check. I had stopped at my bank on the way. The check was made out for the full principal amount. I slid it across the black table. It made a dry, rasping sound that seemed to fill the room. $250,000, I said. Cash. Today. You walk away with your principal intact. You don't have to pay collection agents. You don't have to go to court. You take the money, and you sign the rights to collect over to me. The older man stopped tapping his pen. He picked up the check. He looked at the amount. He looked at the bank seal. Then he looked at me with a new kind of respect. The respect predators have for a bigger predator. "Why?" he asked. "Why would you pay face value for toxic debt?" "Because I like to clean up messes," I said. He didn't ask any more questions. In this world, you don't ask why someone is handing you $250,000. You just take it. They signed the papers. It took 10 minutes. 10 minutes to transfer the chains around my son's neck from their hands to mine. When we walked out of that building, the rain had started again, a light drizzle that blurred the city lights. I held the folder tight against my chest. It felt heavy. It wasn't just paper. It was leverage. "Now for the bank," James said, checking his watch. "We have to hurry. The branch manager is waiting, but they close the corporate services window at 4. The bank was different. It was sterile, quiet, filled with the soft hum of computers. This was where the mortgage lived. This was the big one. The mortgage was the rope Brian was using to hang himself. But it was also the rope he was trying to use to strangle me. We sat in the manager's office. Mr. Henderson looked nervous. He knew me by reputation. He knew I had built the branch building we were sitting in. "Mr. Bennett," Henderson said, wiping sweat from his forehead, "this is highly irregular. Usually we don't sell mortgages to individuals." "I am not an individual," I said, leaning forward. "I am a limited liability company. Martha's Justice, LLC. and I am offering to pay off the entire arrears and purchase the note. You have a non-performing loan on your books. I am offering to make it perform." Henderson looked at James. James nodded. "It is all legal, Henderson. You get the bad debt off your ledger before the quarter ends. My client takes the risk. Everyone wins, except the borrower, of course." Henderson sighed and pushed a stack of documents toward me. As I reached for the pen, James stopped me. He put his hand on my arm. "Wait," James said. He pulled one sheet of paper out of the stack. He adjusted his glasses and peered at it closely. Then he looked at me, his face grim. "Hal, look at this." I looked. It was a document titled Waiver of Spousal and Life Estate Rights. It was dated 6 months ago. At the bottom was a signature. Harold Bennett. It was my name. But it wasn't my handwriting. The loops were too big. The slant was wrong. "I never signed this," I whispered. My blood ran cold. "That is what I thought," James said. His voice turned hard as steel. He looked at Henderson. "This document is a forgery. Brian Bennett forged his father's signature to secure this second mortgage. He told the bank that the life estate was waived so the property would appraise higher." Henderson turned pale. I didn't know. The notary's seal." "The notary is probably one of his drinking buddies," James snapped. "This changes everything, Hal. This isn't just a default on payments. This is fraud. This is a felony." I looked at the signature again. My son had not only gambled away his money, he had stolen my name. He had committed a crime against his own father to fuel his addiction and his wife's vanity. Any hesitation I had left vanished. Any tiny, lingering spark of parental mercy was extinguished right there in that bank office. "Does this give us grounds for immediate action?" I asked. James looked at me. "Grounds? Hal, this gives us a nuclear launch code. With this forgery, we don't have to wait for a standard foreclosure timeline. The contract is voidable, but since you are buying the note, you can declare an immediate breach of contract due to criminal fraud. We can execute an emergency foreclosure. We can seize the property to secure the asset against further criminal activity." "Do it," I said. We finished the transaction. I walked out of the bank as the owner of my own home again, but in a way I never wanted. I wasn't just the owner. I was the executioner. James and I went back to his office to draft the final document, the emergency foreclosure notice. We worded it carefully. We cited the debt, we cited the arrears, and in bold letters, we cited the fraud. While James typed, I stood by the window looking out at the city I helped build. I felt hollow. I had spent my life building things that stood up to storms, earthquakes, and time. But I had failed to build a son who could stand up to temptation. "It is done," James said from behind me. The printer whirred to life. I picked up the document. It was hot from the printer. It smelled of ink and finality. I checked the time. It was 5 in the afternoon. The party started tomorrow at noon. I had 19 hours. I turned to James. "Thank you." He didn't smile. He just nodded. "Be careful, Hal. When you corner a wild animal, it bites." "I am not afraid of biting," I said. "I have the sledgehammer." I took the documents, the evidence of the forgery, and the proof of the debt purchase. I walked out of the office and back to my truck. The city was getting dark. The rush hour traffic was building up. People were going home to their families. They were going home to dinners, to homework, to arguments about bills. to love. I was going home to a war zone. I drove back to the woods, parking in the same spot, hidden by the trees. I watched the house. I saw the delivery trucks arriving with expensive wine. I saw the florists bringing in arrangements that cost more than my first car. They were celebrating. They were laughing. They were spending money they didn't have, in a house they didn't own, on a land they had stolen. I ate a cold sandwich in the cab of my truck. I watched the lights go out one by one in the main house. I waited. The waiting was the hardest part. I wanted to storm in there right now. But I needed the audience. I needed Tiffany's friends to see. I needed the world to see. Because shame is a powerful teacher, and I was about to give a master class. Tomorrow, the gift would be delivered, and it wasn't going to be a sweater. I sat in the cab of my truck with the engine off. The silence of the woods was heavy and absolute. Beside me on the passenger seat lay the stack of legal documents that would destroy my son's life. And next to them sat the urn containing the ashes of the woman who gave him life. It was a strange tableau. Judgment and memory sitting side by side. I had the power to end this right now. I had the foreclosure notice. I had the deed. I could have driven up that driveway, kicked down the door, and thrown them out into the night. But something stopped me. Maybe it was weakness. Maybe it was the ghost of the man I used to be. Or maybe it was just the desperate, foolish hope of a father who needed to be absolutely certain before he pulled the trigger. I needed to give him one last chance. Not for him, but for me. I needed to know that when the hammer fell tomorrow, I had left no door unopened. I needed to know that I wasn't destroying a son who had simply made a mistake, but a stranger who had lost his soul. I picked up my phone. The screen glowed bright in the darkness, illuminating the wrinkles on my hand. I scrolled to Brian's number. My thumb hovered over the call button. I remembered the day I put this number in my phone. It was the day he got his first cell phone, a reward for getting into college. I was so proud that day. I remembered the boy who used to call me just to ask how to tie a tie or how to fix a leaking faucet. Where was that boy? Was he still in there somewhere, buried under the gambling debts and the designer suits? I pressed call. The ringtone buzzed in my ear. Once, twice, 3 times. I almost hung up. Part of me wanted to hang up and just pretend that if he had answered, he would have been kind. But then the line clicked open. Hello? Brian's voice was hushed, impatient. Dad, why are you calling? I told you not to call. I took a deep breath. I made my voice sound small. I made it sound like the old, defeated man they thought I was. Brian, I said, letting a tremor slide into my words. It is getting cold out here, son. The heater in the truck is broken. My hip is hurting bad. I don't think I can make it through the night out here. There was silence on the other end. Not a dead silence, but a heavy, guilty silence. I could hear the faint sound of jazz music in the background. I could hear the clinking of glass. They were pre-gaming for the party. They were warm. Dad, Brian whispered. Look, I can't talk right now. Please, Brian, I pleaded. I am not asking to stay forever, just tonight. Just let me sleep on the couch in the study. I will be gone before Tiffany wakes up. I just need to get out of the cold. Please, son, for your mother's sake. I played the mother card. It was a low blow, perhaps, but I had to know. I had to know if her name still meant anything to him. I heard him sigh. It was a long, ragged exhale. For a second, I thought he was going to say yes. I thought I heard the crack in his armor. I thought I heard the boy I raised. Hang on, he said. I heard the phone rustle against fabric, like he was covering the microphone. But he didn't cover it completely. Technology is a funny thing. People think they are mute, but they are just muffled. I pressed the phone tighter to my ear. I strained to hear through the static. "Who is it?" Tiffany's voice cut through the background noise. It was sharp, demanding. "It is my dad," Brian mumbled. "He says he is freezing. He wants to sleep on the couch just for tonight." I closed my eyes. I could see them. I could visualize the scene perfectly. They were in the master bedroom. Tiffany was standing in front of the full-length mirror, probably holding up a dress that cost $3,000. Brian was standing by the door, shoulders slumped, looking at the floor. "Absolutely not," Tiffany snapped. I heard her clearly. "Tell him no. If you let him in tonight, he will never leave. Besides, I have the caterers coming at 6 in the morning. I don't want them stepping over a homeless man in the living room. It ruins the aesthetic, Brian. Tell him to figure it out." "But Tiff, it is really cold," Brian said. His voice was weak, pathetic. "I don't care," she shouted. She was angry now. "Hang up the phone, Brian. Focus on me. Does this dress make me look fat? Stop worrying about your dad and start worrying about your wife." The rustling stopped. Brian came back on the line. "Dad," he said. His voice was different now, harder, colder. He had made his choice. He had chosen the dress over the father. "I am still here, son," I said softly. "Yeah, listen," Brian said, rushing his words. "We really can't have you here tonight. Tiffany is... well, the house is upside down with the party prep. It is just not a good time." Not a good time. I looked at my breath fogging up the windshield. "Where am I supposed to go, Brian?" I asked. "Look, find a motel," he said. "There is a Motel 6 on the highway. It is cheap." "I don't have any cash," I lied. I had a check for $15 million in the glove box, but he didn't know that. I heard him tap on his screen. "I am sending you $50 on Venmo," he said. "That should cover a room. Just go there, and Dad, please don't call again tonight. Tiffany is really stressed out about tomorrow, and you upset her when you call. Let's just let everyone calm down, okay?" A notification pinged on my screen. "Brian Bennett sent you $50. $50. I looked at the number. $50. That was the price he put on me. That was the value of 40 years of sacrifice. I worked double shifts to pay for his private school. $50. I bought him his first car. $50. I handed him a debt-free mansion. $50. Something inside me finally died. It wasn't a violent death. It was quiet. It was the flame of hope flickering out, because there was no oxygen left to sustain it. The last tether that connected me to the name Father snapped. "Thank you, Brian," I said. My voice was unrecognizable to my own ears. It was completely devoid of emotion. It was dead flat. "Yeah, okay, good," Brian said, relieved to be off the hook. "Get some sleep, Dad. We will figure something out next week." "No," I said. "We won't." "What?" he asked. "Goodbye, Brian." I ended the call. I didn't slam the phone down. I placed it gently on the dashboard. I stared out into the dark woods. I felt tears pricking my eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of mourning. I was mourning the death of my son. The man in that house wasn't Brian. The man in that house was a hollow shell filled with fear and greed. My Brian, the boy who used to fish with me, the boy who cried when his goldfish died, that boy was gone. Tiffany had hollowed him out and worn him like a suit, and he had let her. $50. I reached for the bottle of water on the floor and took a sip. The cold water woke me up. I picked up the foreclosure document again. I turned on the overhead light in the truck. I read the words immediate possession and eviction. Suddenly the cold didn't bother me. The ache in my hip vanished. A cold iron resolve settled into my bones. I am not a father anymore, I whispered to the empty cabin. I am a creditor, and tomorrow I am coming to collect. I reclined the seat. I wasn't going to the motel. I wasn't going to spend his $50. I was going to stay right here. I wanted to be cold. I wanted to feel every degree of the temperature drop. I wanted to remember exactly how it felt to be thrown away, so that tomorrow, when they cried, when they begged, when they realized what was happening, I wouldn't feel a single thing. I closed my eyes, but I didn't sleep. I lay there in the dark, listening to the wind howl through the pines, visualizing the sledgehammer sitting next to me. Sleep tight, Brian. Enjoy your warm bed. Enjoy your wife's new dress. Because tomorrow, the world you think you own is going to come crashing down, and $50 isn't going to be enough to save you. Tomorrow, the landlord is coming home. By noon, the rain had finally stopped, leaving behind a sky that was a piercing shade of blue. It was a beautiful day for a birthday party, and a perfect day for an execution. From my vantage point in the woods, I watched the transformation of my property. It was like watching a stage crew set up for a play. White tents were erected on the lawn where I used to play catch with my son. Waiters in white tuxedos moved like ants, carrying silver trays of hors d'oeuvres that probably cost more than my monthly food budget. A jazz band set up near the fountain, filling the air with smooth saxophone notes that floated over the trees to where I sat in my cold, damp truck. I watched the guests arrive. They pulled up in Bentleys and Teslas, handing their keys to the valets with a casual indifference that made my stomach churn. These were Tiffany's people, influencers, social climbers, people who took photos of their food before they tasted it and checked their reflection in every window they passed. They were beautiful and hollow, just like the woman of the hour. I saw Brian greeting people at the entrance. He looked terrible. Even from this distance, I could see the dark circles under his eyes. He was sweating despite the cool breeze. He kept checking his phone, probably hoping to see a notification that I had checked into the Motel 6. Sorry, son. The only notification you are going to get today is the sound of my engine. Around 1 o'clock, the party was in full swing. The jazz band picked up the tempo. The champagne tower was built a pyramid of crystal glasses shimmering in the sunlight. It stood right in the center of the garden, waiting for the toast. Tiffany was holding court in the middle of it all, wearing a dress that glittered like diamonds. She threw her head back and laughed at something a guest said, and the sound carried to me. It was the laugh of someone who thinks she has gotten away with murder. I checked the clock on the dashboard. 1:15. It was time. I reached over and patted the brass urn on the passenger seat. Are you ready, Martha? Let's go introduce ourselves to the guests. I turned the key. The old Ford engine roared to life. It didn't purr like the luxury cars in the driveway. It growled. It coughed. It sounded like an angry beast waking up from a long hibernation. I shifted into gear and pulled out of the woods. I didn't take the service road. I turned onto the main driveway. The valets looked up, startled, as my rusted truck came barreling toward them. They waved their arms, trying to direct me to the delivery entrance around the back. I didn't slow down. I wasn't a delivery driver. I was the owner. At the top of the driveway, Tiffany had set up a massive floral archway. Thousands of white roses and lilies woven together to create a grand entrance for her VIP guests. It was delicate, it was expensive, and it was right in my way. I gripped the steering wheel tight. I didn't touch the brakes. The front grille of my truck hit the floral arch with a sickening crunch of wood and metal. Petals exploded into the air like white confetti. The structure collapsed, dragging a silk banner with it. I kept driving, dragging the remains of the arch under my tires. The sound was like a gunshot. The jazz band stopped playing instantly. The chatter of the guests died. 200 heads turned in unison toward the driveway. I drove the truck right onto the manicured lawn. My heavy tires tore deep ruts into the soft green grass, destroying the landscaping Tiffany prided herself on. I plowed through a table of expensive appetizers, sending silver platters of shrimp and caviar flying into the air. I didn't stop until the nose of my truck was 5 feet away from the champagne tower. I slammed on the brakes. The truck shuddered to a halt. Silence. Absolute stunned silence. Dust and rose petals settled around the truck. The engine idled loudly, a rhythmic mechanical heartbeat in the quiet garden. Behind me, 2 more vehicles pulled onto the lawn. A large white moving truck with the words "Rapid Eviction Services" printed on the side, and a police cruiser with its blue lights flashing silently. Tiffany stood frozen near the champagne tower. Her mouth was open. Her face was a mask of shock that was quickly turning into rage. She didn't see the police car yet. She only saw the rusted truck and the old man who was supposed to be gone. She marched toward me, her heels sinking into the grass. "What do you think you are doing?" she screamed. Her voice cracked, shattering the sophisticated atmosphere she had worked so hard to create. "Are you insane? Look at what you did. You ruined the flowers. You ruined the lawn. Get that piece of junk out of here right now." I opened the driver's door. It creaked loudly. I stepped out. My boots sank into the mud I had created. I stood up straight, adjusting my old blazer. I didn't look at the ground. I looked straight at her. "Security!" Tiffany yelled, waving her arms frantically at 2 large men in black suits standing near the perimeter. "Get over here! Arrest him! Throw this crazy old man off my property! He is trespassing! He is dangerous!" The security guards hesitated. They saw the police cruiser parked behind me. They saw the sheriff stepping out of the car, adjusting his belt. They were hired muscle, but they weren't stupid. They stayed exactly where they were. Tiffany didn't notice the sheriff. She was too focused on me. She stormed up to me, getting right in my face. The smell of expensive champagne on her breath was overpowering. "You are senile," she hissed, so only I could hear. "I gave you a chance, Harold. I told you to leave quietly. Now I am going to have you committed. I will throw you in a state ward so fast your head will spin. You just made the biggest mistake of your life." I looked at her. I looked at the fear behind the anger. "No, Tiffany," I said, my voice calm and loud enough for the nearby guests to hear. "The mistake was thinking you could steal a man's life and he wouldn't come back for it." I reached into the truck and pulled out the blue legal folder. I also grabbed the sledgehammer. The crowd gasped when they saw the weapon. Some of the guests started to back away, clutching their designer handbags. Brian pushed his way through the crowd. He looked like he was about to vomit. "Dad," Brian stammered, his hands shaking. "Dad, please, put the hammer down. Let's talk about this inside. Everyone is watching. I ignored him. I walked past Tiffany. I walked past Brian. I walked straight to the microphone stand where the jazz singer had been crooning just moments ago. I tapped the microphone. Thump, thump. The sound echoed across the silent garden. I looked out at the sea of strangers drinking my wine on my land. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice booming through the speakers. "I apologize for the interruption. My name is Harold Bennett. I built this house. I paid for this land. And I am the father of the man standing over there, shaking in his Italian shoes." I pointed the sledgehammer at Brian. He flinched. "You are all here to celebrate a birthday," I continued. "But I am afraid there has been a change of plans. This is no longer a birthday party. This is an eviction." Tiffany screamed, "Shut up! Shut him up! Somebody stop him!" She lunged for the microphone, but the sheriff stepped forward, blocking her path. "Ma'am, step back," the sheriff said, his voice authoritative. Tiffany stopped staring at the uniform. "What? What is going on? Why aren't you arresting him? He crashed his truck into my party." "I am not arresting him, ma'am, because he owns the property," the sheriff said calmly. "And he has a court order for immediate possession." I turned back to the crowd. "My daughter-in-law told me yesterday to go die in the street," I said, looking directly into the camera of a guest who was live-streaming the whole thing. "She threw my wife's belongings in the trash. She told me I was a burden. Well, today, the burden is being removed." I held up the blue folder. "This is a foreclosure notice," I announced. "As of 5 p.m. yesterday, I purchased the mortgage on this estate. I also purchased the $250,000 in gambling debt my son racked up." The crowd murmured. Whispers of gambling and debt rippled through the guests like a wave. Brian covered his face with his hands, and since the terms of the mortgage were violated by fraud, I continued, my eyes locking on Brian. "I am exercising my right as the lender to seize the property immediately." I dropped the folder on the grass. I gripped the sledgehammer with both hands. I turned to the champagne tower, the symbol of their excess, the symbol of their lies. "You wanted a gift, Tiffany?" I said, raising the hammer. "Here it is." I swung. The silence in the garden was absolute. The only sound was the hissing of the radiator from my truck and the crunch of broken crystal under my heavy work boots as I stepped down from the cab. I smoothed down the front of my old tweed jacket. It was threadbare at the elbows and smelled faintly of wood smoke and damp pine, but I wore it with the dignity of a general stepping onto a battlefield. I was not the crazy old man they wanted me to be. I was the architect of their destruction, and I had arrived to inspect the demolition site. Tiffany stood frozen near the ruins of her champagne tower. Her dress was splattered with expensive wine and mud. Her chest was heaving with a mixture of rage and terror. She looked at the destruction I had caused, and then she looked at me, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of doubt in her eyes. She opened her mouth to scream again, to order her security guards to tackle me, but the words died in her throat when she saw the look on my face. It was not the face of a victim. It was the face of a man who held all the cards. I reached back into the cab of the truck and pulled out the long rectangular box I had prepared. It was wrapped in red velvet with a gold ribbon tied in a perfect bow. It looked elegant. It looked expensive. It looked like exactly the kind of gift a wealthy father-in-law would give to his beloved daughter-in-law on her 30th birthday. Except it weighed 20 pounds. I walked toward her. The crowd of guests parted like the Red Sea. These people were vultures. They sensed blood in the water, and their curiosity was stronger than their fear. They held up their phones, recording every step I took. I wanted them to record. I wanted the world to see this. "Happy birthday, Tiffany," I said, my voice calm and steady. "I told you I would bring you a gift. I am a man of my word." I held the box out to her. She stared at it like it was a bomb. "Take it," I commanded. Her hands were shaking as she reached out. The moment the weight of the box transferred to her arms, she nearly dropped it. She stumbled back in her high heels, struggling to hold the heavy object. "What is this?" she whispered. Her voice was trembling. "Is this a joke?" "Open it," I said. "Go ahead. Everyone is watching. Don't be rude to your guest." She looked at Brian for help, but Brian was useless. He was standing 10 feet away, pale as a ghost, staring at the logo on the side of my truck. He knew. He had figured it out. But he was too paralyzed to stop her. Tiffany pulled the gold ribbon. It unraveled slowly, slipping to the grass. She tore at the red velvet paper. Underneath was a rough wooden crate. She fumbled with the latch. Click. She lifted the lid. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Nestled inside the box, on a bed of black foam, lay a heavy-duty construction sledgehammer. Its iron head was polished and gleaming in the afternoon sun. Taped to the handle with blue electrical tape was a thick stack of legal documents, stamped with the red seal of the county court. Tiffany stared at the hammer. She didn't understand. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with confusion and fear. "A hammer," she spat. "You brought me a hammer. You are insane. You are actually insane." I walked over to the microphone stand where the jazz singer had abandoned his post. I tapped the mic again to make sure it was on. Feedback squealed through the speakers, making everyone wince. "It is not just the hammer, Tiffany," I said, my voice amplified across the entire estate. "It is a tool for renovation. And those papers taped to the handle are your instructions." "Read the first page," I said. She didn't want to read it. She wanted to throw the box at me. But the sheriff was standing right there, his hand resting on his belt, watching her closely. She had no choice. She ripped the papers off the handle. Her eyes scanned the top line. "Notice of immediate foreclosure," she read out loud before she could stop herself. "That is right," I said. I looked out at the guests. I made eye contact with the bankers, the lawyers, the real estate agents who were drinking my wine. "Yesterday, my daughter-in-law told me that I was a squatter in my own home," I told the crowd. "She told me I had no rights. She told me to go sleep in the dirt. She was right about one thing. I didn't have the rights. The bank did." I turned back to Tiffany. "So this morning, I went to the bank. I bought the mortgage, Tiffany. Every single cent of it. I also bought the credit card debt you used to buy that dress. And I bought the gambling markers my son signed in Las Vegas." Brian let out a choked sob. He sank to his knees in the grass, putting his head in his hands. "I am no longer just your father-in-law," I said, my voice hardening into steel. "I am your primary creditor. I am the bank. I am the institution that owns the roof over your head, the ground under your feet, and the clothes on your back." Tiffany shook her head violently. "No, no, you can't do this. We have 30 days. The law says we have 30 days to cure the default. You can't just kick us out." "Wrong," I thundered. I pointed to the papers in her hand. "Read paragraph 4, the fraud clause."
She stared at the paper. Her eyes moved frantically back and forth. When a borrower commits fraud against the lender, the loan is called immediately due and payable in full, I recited from memory.
My son forged my signature on a waiver of life estate document. That is a felony. That is fraud. And since I am the lender, I am calling the loan. Right now. I checked my old wristwatch. Technically, you have been in default for 12 hours. You are trespassing on my property. You are holding a party on my land without a permit. Tiffany dropped the papers. They scattered in the wind, fluttering across the ruined lawn like dead leaves. She looked at the mansion behind her, her castle, her stage, her identity. It was slipping through her fingers like sand. "You can't do this to family," she screamed. Tears were streaming down her face now, ruining her makeup. "We are family, Harold. How can you be so cruel?" "Cruel?" I asked. I stepped closer to her. "Cruel is throwing a man's life work into a trash bag. Cruel is kicking an old man when he is down. Cruel is telling your father to die in the street so you can have more closet space." I picked up the sledgehammer from the box. I held it in my hand, feeling its familiar weight. It was heavy, but it felt righteous. "I gave you a choice last night, Tiffany. I asked for one night of shelter. You gave me $50 and told me to get lost." I turned to the sheriff. "Sheriff, these people are trespassing. I want them removed. Immediately. They can take nothing with them. Everything in the house is collateral against the debt they owe me. The cars, the furniture, the jewelry, it all stays." Tiffany lunged at me. She tried to scratch my face, her nails like claws. "Get out!" she shrieked. "I hate you! I hope you die!" The sheriff moved fast. Before she could touch me, he had her arm twisted behind her back. Another deputy grabbed Brian, who didn't even fight back. He just let himself be dragged up like a rag doll. "Get them out of my sight," I said, turning my back on them. I looked at the stunned guests. The music had stopped. The food was ruined. The party was over. "Enjoy the show, folks," I said into the microphone one last time. "And remember, always pay your debts, especially to your parents." I dropped the microphone. It hit the grass with a dull thud. I didn't watch them being cuffed. I didn't watch them being dragged toward the police cruisers. I picked up the sledgehammer and walked toward the front door of the main house. I had some remodeling to do. Specifically, I needed to remove the bad memories from the walls. My gift had been delivered, and now it was time to take back my home. "You are insane!" Tiffany screamed, struggling against the grip of the deputy who was trying to steer her away from the microphone stand. Her face was twisted into a mask of pure desperation and denial. She looked at the guests who were watching in stunned silence and tried one last time to manipulate the narrative. "Do not listen to him!" she shrieked, her voice cracking with hysteria. "He is lying. This is my house. The deed is in my husband's name. Brian, tell them!" "Tell them this is our property, and he is just a crazy old man off his medication." Brian did not speak. He stood with his head bowed, looking at the ruined grass. His silence was deafening, but Tiffany was not done. She was a creature of image, and she would fight to protect her facade until the bitter end. She turned back to me, spitting her words. "You have no proof, Harold. You can wave a sledgehammer around all you want, but you cannot just steal a house. I will sue you for everything you have. I will make sure you die in a cell." I looked at her calmly. I signaled to the sheriff to hold her there for a moment. I wanted her to see this. I wanted her to understand exactly how thoroughly she had been dismantled. You want proof, Tiffany? I asked, my voice low and dangerous. You want everyone here to know the truth about who owns this house and what kind of people you really are? I turned toward the patio, where a large white projection screen had been set up for her birthday slideshow. It was supposed to display photos of her fabulous life and her curated trips to Paris and Milan. Instead, my lawyer James was standing by the laptop connected to the projector. He looked at me and nodded. "Hit it, James," I said. The screen flickered. The image of Tiffany holding a champagne glass disappeared. In its place, a high-resolution scan of a document appeared. It was blown up large enough for everyone in the back of the garden to read. It was the loan agreement from the bank, the one Brian had signed 6 months ago. James zoomed in on the bottom of the page. There, in black and white, was the signature line, Harold Bennett. The crowd murmured. They were wealthy people. They understood contracts. They understood signatures. "That is my name," I said, pointing to the screen. "But that is not my handwriting." James clicked the next slide. It was a side-by-side comparison. On the left was the signature on the loan document. On the right was my actual signature for my driver's license and 30 years of business documents. The difference was obvious. The loop on the B was wrong. The slant was inconsistent. It was a clumsy forgery done by a desperate man. "Your husband forged my signature to take out a second mortgage on this property," I explained to the crowd. "That is a felony called fraud. And because he committed fraud against the lender, the loan is in default. I bought that loan yesterday. So now I am the victim, the witness, and the judge." Tiffany stopped struggling. She stared at the screen, her face draining of color. But she still had one card left to play. She shook her head, trying to laugh. "So what?" she said, her voice trembling. "So Brian signed a paper. Big deal. That is a business dispute. That does not give you the right to ruin my birthday and humiliate me. We are good people, Harold. We treat you with respect. We gave you a place to live." I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "Respect?" I asked. "You want to talk about respect?" I nodded to James again. "Show them," I said. The screen went black for a second, then a video file began to play. It was grainy footage from the security camera inside the living room. The timestamp in the corner read 5:30 p.m. the previous day. The garden went deadly silent. On the screen, everyone saw Tiffany standing in the living room holding the brass urn. They saw me standing there in my old flannel shirt, pleading with her. The audio was clear, crisp, and damning. "It is bad luck, Harold. It is dead energy, literally," the Tiffany on the screen said, her voice dripping with malice. The guests gasped. A woman in the front row covered her mouth with her hand. On the screen, Tiffany swung her arm. She tossed the urn. The crowd watched in horror as the urn hit the floor and the cloud of gray ash exploded into the air, coating my clothes. "Gross. Look at that mess. You got dead person all over the floor. Get the vacuum, Harold." The video froze on that frame. The image of me kneeling on the floor, scooping up my wife's ashes with my bare hands, while Tiffany stood over me with a look of disgust, was burned into the retina of every single person at that party. I looked at the real Tiffany standing on the lawn. She was no longer fighting the deputy. She was shrinking. She looked small. She looked naked. The social armor she had spent years building, the lies about being a philanthropist, the lies about being a loving daughter-in-law, all of it was stripped away in seconds. The reaction from the crowd was immediate and visceral. These were shallow people, yes, but even they had lines they would not cross. Desecrating the remains of a mother was a sin that no amount of money could cover up. People began to turn away. Some were shaking their heads. I heard the word monster whispered more than once. A man who I recognized as the president of the local Rotary Club took out his phone and deliberately stopped recording, looking at Tiffany with pure contempt before turning his back on her. "You are sick, Tiffany," someone shouted from the back. "How could you do that to him?" Another voice cried out. Tiffany looked around frantically. She looked for an ally. She looked for a friend. But there were no friends here. There was only an audience, and the show had turned into a horror movie. "That is the woman you are," I said, my voice cutting through the murmurs. "That is the person behind the designer dress and the fake smile. You didn't just break a contract, Tiffany. You broke the basic laws of human decency." I signaled to James to cut the feed. The screen went black, leaving only the harsh sunlight and the wreckage of the party. "Now," I said, turning back to the sheriff, "get them off my property. I have a house to clean." This time, Tiffany did not scream. She did not fight. She slumped in the deputy's grip, her eyes hollow and staring at nothing. She knew it was over. Not just the house, not just the money. Her reputation was dead. She was a pariah. In the age of the internet, that video would be everywhere by tonight. She was finished. I watched as the deputies marched them toward the patrol cars. Brian was weeping openly now, a broken man who had sold his soul and got nothing in return. Tiffany walked like a zombie, her heels dragging in the mud she had created. The guests began to scatter. They hurried to their cars, eager to escape the blast radius of the scandal. They left their half-eaten food and their unfinished drinks. None of them looked at me. They were ashamed. Ashamed that they had celebrated her. Ashamed that they had been part of the lie. I stood alone in the center of the garden, clutching the sledgehammer. I felt a heavy weight lift off my chest. The truth was out. The poison had been drawn. It was painful, but it was necessary. I looked at the empty champagne glass on the ground near my boot. I crushed it under my heel. "Class dismissed," I whispered to the wind. The garden was silent, except for the sound of the wind rustling through the torn banner of the collapsed floral arch. The video screen had gone black, but the image of my daughter-in-law desecrating my wife's ashes was still burned into everyone's retinas. Tiffany stood alone near the buffet table, shivering, not from the cold, but from the sudden freezing isolation of social death. Her friends, the people she had spent years trying to impress, were backing away from her as if she carried a contagious disease. But I was not looking at Tiffany. I was looking at my son. Brian was on his knees in the mud. His expensive Italian suit was stained green with grass and brown with dirt. He looked small. He looked like a child who had broken a vase and was waiting for the punishment he knew he deserved, but hoped he could charm his way out of. He looked up at me with wet red eyes, expecting the bailout. He always expected the bailout. For 35 years, I had been his safety net. When he crashed his car, I bought him a new one. When he failed his college classes, I made a donation. When he needed a down payment, I sold my home. Not today. Today the net was gone, and he was staring into the abyss. Sheriff Miller stepped forward. He was a good man, a man I had fished with for 20 years. He hated this. I could see it in the set of his jaw. He hated arresting the son of his friend. But Joe Miller respected the law more than he respected feelings, and that was why I had called him. He walked over to Brian, his boots heavy on the soft ground. He reached to his belt and unclipped the handcuffs. The metallic rasp of the steel was the loudest sound in the world. "Brian Bennett," Sheriff Miller said, his voice formal and flat. "Please stand up and place your hands behind your back." Brian blinked. He looked around frantically, as if looking for a hidden camera, as if hoping this was all part of some twisted birthday surprise. "What?" Brian stammered. Joe, it is me, Brian. We went to the lodge together last Christmas. What are you doing?" "I am not Joe right now, son," Sheriff Miller said. "I am the sheriff of King County. Stand up." Brian didn't stand up. He couldn't. His legs had given out. So Miller reached down, grabbed him by the arm of his jacket, and hauled him to his feet. Brian swayed like a drunk. "You are under arrest for first-degree forgery, bank fraud, and identity theft." Miller recited the charges. He spun Brian around and pulled his wrists together behind his back. Click, click. The sound of the cuffs locking was final. It was the sound of a steel door slamming shut on a life of privilege. Brian began to hyperventilate. The reality of the situation hit him like a physical blow. He wasn't going to the country club. He wasn't going to sleep in his king-sized bed. He was going to a holding cell. "Dad," Brian screamed. He twisted his body, trying to look at me. "Dad, stop him! Tell him to stop! This is a mistake! It is just a misunderstanding. I can explain. I was going to pay it back. I swear I was going to pay it back once the house sold." I stood 10 feet away, leaning on the handle of the sledgehammer. I watched him struggle. My heart was breaking into a million pieces inside my chest. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to run to him, to pay the bail, to hire the lawyers to fix it. That is what a father does, right? A father protects. But then I remembered the signature. I remembered the document where he stole my name. I remembered the $50 he sent me when I begged for shelter. Protecting him now wouldn't be love. It would be complicity. "Dad, please," Brian sobbed, tears streaming down his face, mixing with the snot running from his nose. "Don't let them take me. I am scared, Dad, please. I am your son." I walked closer to him. The deputy stepped back to let me have a moment. I looked into his eyes. I saw the fear, but I didn't see remorse. I saw regret. There is a difference. He wasn't sorry he did it. He was sorry he got caught. "You are right, Brian," I said softly. "You are my son, and that is my greatest failure." Brian stopped crying for a second, stunned by my words. "I raised you to be a man," I continued, my voice trembling with suppressed emotion. "I gave you everything: education, opportunity, love. And what did you become? A thief, a liar, a coward who lets his wife abuse his father." "Dad, I am sorry," Brian wailed. "I am so sorry." "You are not sorry," I said. "You are just broke." I reached out and touched his cheek. It was cold. "I can't save you from this, Brian. If I save you now, you will never learn. You have spent your whole life hiding behind my wallet. Well, the wallet is closed." Brian's knees buckled again, but the sheriff held him up. "Where are you taking him?" Tiffany screamed, suddenly finding her voice. She rushed forward, her eyes wild. She didn't care about Brian. She cared about the asset. She cared about the husband who paid the bills. If he went to jail, she was truly destitute. You can't arrest him, she yelled, pointing a shaking finger at Miller. Do you know who we are? We are the Bennetts. My husband has anxiety. He can't go to jail. He needs his medication. I will sue you. I will sue this whole department. I will call the mayor. Sheriff Miller looked at her with pure disdain. Ma'am, you might want to save your breath for your own lawyer, Miller said. Judging by the evidence Mr. Bennett here provided regarding your complicity in the fraud, you might be receiving a visit from the district attorney yourself very soon. For now, step back, or I will arrest you for obstruction of justice. Tiffany froze. The threat of her own arrest shut her up instantly. Self-preservation was her only true instinct. She stepped back, leaving her husband alone. Brian saw it. He saw his wife retreat. He saw her choose herself over him. Again. Dad, Brian whispered, his voice barely audible. Help me. I looked at him one last time. I hardened my heart. I had to. It was the only way to save him from himself. I failed to teach you how to be a man, Brian, I said, my voice cold and hard as the iron hammer in my hand. I failed to teach you honor. I failed to teach you consequences. I nodded to the sheriff. Take him away, Joe. Maybe the state prison system can teach him the lessons I couldn't. Maybe a 6x8 cell will teach you the value of freedom, Brian. Because you clearly didn't value it when you had it. No, Dad, no, Brian screamed as they began to drag him toward the cruiser. I didn't turn away. I forced myself to watch. I watched my son being shoved into the back of the police car. I watched him press his face against the glass, mouthing the word, please. I watched the door slam shut. I stood there until the cruiser drove away, its lights flashing silently against the bright afternoon sun. Only then did I let out the breath I had been holding. I felt old. I felt tired. Older than my 72 years. The guests were completely silent. Nobody moved. Nobody checked their phone. They had just witnessed a Greek tragedy in the middle of a garden party. A father sacrificing his son to the gods of justice. I turned to Tiffany. She was standing alone on the ruined lawn. Her husband was gone. Her house was gone. Her status was gone. She looked at me with hate. Pure, unadulterated hate. I hope you rot in hell, Harold, she hissed. I looked around at the wreckage of the party. I looked at the empty champagne bottles. I looked at the tire tracks in the grass. I am already there, Tiffany, I said quietly. I have been there since you threw my wife in the trash. But the difference is, I am climbing out today. I checked my watch. You have 5 minutes to get off my property, I said to her. If you are still here when the minute hand hits the 12, I will have the sheriff come back for you. And Tiffany. She looked at me wary. Don't take the silver, I said. I counted it this morning. She let out a scream of frustration, a primal sound of defeat, and turned, running toward the house to grab her purse. She was running out of time, and for the first time in her life, she had nowhere to go. Chào bạn, tôi là Cường Da Trắng. Đây là phân cảnh 12, trục xuất, The Walk of Shame. Kịch bản được viết bằng tiếng Anh sử dụng phong cách voice AI liên tục, continuous flow. Không viết hoa tùy tiện, hạn chế dấu câu đặc biệt, tập trung vào sự lạnh lùng và chi tiết thực tế tàn khốc của màn lật kèo cuối cùng. Tiffany ran toward the massive oak front doors, her heels clicking frantically on the stone steps. She looked like a rat trying to scurry back into a sinking ship before the water completely swallowed it. She reached the handle, pulling it open with a desperate force that nearly broke her manicured nails. I followed her at a steady pace, the sheriff right beside me. We walked into the foyer, the grand entrance that I had designed with high ceilings to welcome family, but which now felt like a mausoleum for a dead marriage. Tiffany was already halfway up the stairs. "I am getting my things!" she screamed over her shoulder, not looking back. "I am taking my clothes, I am taking my jewelry, and I am leaving. You can have this damn house, Harold, but you are not taking my life." Sheriff Miller looked at me. I nodded slowly. "Stop right there, Tiffany," I boomed, my voice bouncing off the marble walls. She froze, her hand gripping the banister. She turned around, her face smeared with mascara and sweat. "What now?" she hissed. "You are not taking anything," I said, calm and cold. "What are you talking about?" she laughed, a hysterical edge to her voice. "They're my clothes, Harold. I bought them." "With what money?" I asked, walking to the bottom of the stairs. "Did you buy them with money you earned from a job you don't have? Or did you buy them with the credit cards that are now in default? Did you buy them with the second mortgage my son fraudulently signed?" She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "Everything in this house," I continued, pointing a finger at the ceiling. "Everything from the chandeliers to the designer sheets on your bed is purchased with debt. And since I own that debt, I own the collateral. That includes your closet, Tiffany." "No!" she shrieked. "No, that is illegal. You can't strip me naked." "I am not stripping you naked," I said. "You are wearing a dress, a very expensive dress. Consider that a parting gift. But that is all you leave with. No suitcases, no jewelry box, no laptop. Just you and the bad choices you made." She looked at the sheriff, pleading with her eyes. "Joe, please, this is insane. Tell him he can't do this." "I need my coat. It is freezing outside." Sheriff Miller adjusted his hat. His face was stone. "Actually, ma'am, Mr. Bennett is within his rights. Under the terms of the emergency foreclosure and the writ of possession filed this morning, all personal property purchased with the defaulted funds is considered secured assets, pending an audit. Until the court sorts out what is yours and what belongs to the estate, nothing leaves the premises." Tiffany slumped against the railing. The fight drained out of her. She looked at the heavy diamond ring on her finger. She started to twist it nervously. "That too," I said. She looked up, startled. "My wedding ring." "Your wedding ring, bought with my money, given to a son who betrayed me, worn by a woman who abused me. Take it off, Tiffany." She hesitated. For a moment, I thought she was going to throw it at me. Instead, she slowly slid the ring off her finger. She walked down the stairs, her steps heavy and defeated. She dropped the ring into my outstretched hand. It felt cold and heavy. It didn't feel like a symbol of love anymore. It felt like payment. "Now," I said, pocketing the ring. "Get out." She looked at the door. Outside, the sun was beginning to set. The air was turning crisp and biting. The typical Pacific Northwest chill was settling in. The kind of damp cold that seeps through silk in seconds. "My car keys," she whispered. "I need my car keys. How am I supposed to leave?" "The Range Rover is leased under the company name," I said. "The company that is currently insolvent. The repo team is already on their way. You can walk, Tiffany.
There is a bus stop 2 miles down the road." She looked at me with horror. "Walk? In these heels?" "You should have thought about that before you told an old man to sleep in the woods," I said. She stared at me for a long moment.
The hate in her eyes was gone, replaced by a terrifying realization of her new reality. She was 30 years old. She had no job, no husband, no home, no car, and no money. She was starting over from zero. She turned toward the door. She walked past the sheriff, who stepped aside to let her pass. She walked past the movers, who were already bringing in boxes to pack up the art. She stepped out onto the porch. I followed her. I stood in the doorway, my hand resting on the heavy brass frame, exactly where she had stood yesterday evening. Yesterday she had stood here in a warm robe, looking down at me in the rain, holding a trash bag. Today the roles were perfectly reversed. I was the one in the warm house. I was the one with the power. And she was the one facing the elements. She stopped on the top step, shivering as the wind hit her bare arms. She hugged herself, trying to cover her exposed skin. She looked back at me one last time. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. Her eyes said it all. She was broken. I looked at her. I felt a moment of pity, just a flicker. It would have been easy to give her a coat. It would have been easy to give her $20 for a cab. But then I remembered the soup on the floor. I remembered the yarn in the trash. I remembered her voice calling me a burden. Mercy is for those who show mercy. Tiffany had shown none. "You told me to go die in the street, Tiffany," I said, my voice quiet but carrying clearly in the evening air. "You pointed to the road and said it didn't matter where I went as long as I was gone." She looked down at her feet. "Well," I continued, leaning against the door frame, "now the person in the street is you. The world is a cold place when you don't have someone else's money to keep you warm." I reached for the door handle. "Good luck with the Seattle winter," I said. I didn't slam the door. I closed it firmly. The heavy latch clicked into place with a sound like a gavel hitting a desk. I turned the deadbolt. Clack. I stood in the foyer alone. The house was quiet. The screaming was gone. The music was gone. I walked over to the window and pulled back the curtain just an inch. I watched her walking down the long driveway. She was struggling. Her high heels were sinking into the gravel. She was shivering violently. Her arms wrapped tight around her chest. She looked small and insignificant against the backdrop of the towering pine trees. She reached the main gate and hesitated, looking left and right. The road was empty. She started walking, step by step, away from the mansion, away from the life she thought she deserved, into the darkness. I let the curtain fall back into place. I turned around and looked at my home. It was a mess. There was mud on the carpet. There were strangers in the kitchen packing up silver. My son was in a cell. My heart was heavy. But for the first time in years, the air in the house felt clean. The toxicity was gone, expelled. I was alone, but I was free. And as I walked toward the kitchen to finally make myself a hot cup of coffee in my own home, I knew that I would be okay. I had reclaimed my dignity, and that was worth more than all the gold in the world. I stood in the center of the kitchen, holding a mug of black coffee that I had brewed in the old pot I kept in the guest house. The main house coffee machine was a spaceship of chrome and buttons that I never bothered to learn how to use, and frankly, I didn't want to touch it. The house was quiet now. The kind of quiet that rings in your ears after a loud explosion. The movers hired by the court had finished clearing out the furniture, the electronics, and the designer clothes. The rooms echoed. The marble floors gleamed under the recessed lighting, but they felt cold and sterile. This wasn't a home anymore. Maybe it never really was. It was just a stage set for a play that had a tragic ending. I walked through the empty living room. I looked at the spot on the floor where Tiffany had thrown Martha's ashes. I had scrubbed it myself on my hands and knees, not because I wanted to save the floor, but because I wanted to perform the act of cleansing. I wanted to wipe away the disrespect with my own sweat. The stain was gone, but I could still see it in my mind's eye. I knew I could never live here again. Every corner of this mansion held a shadow of betrayal. If I stayed, I would see Brian's face in the hallway. I would hear Tiffany's screeching voice in the foyer. This house was poisoned by greed, and no amount of bleach could wash that away. James arrived around 6 o'clock. He didn't knock. He just walked in carrying his leather briefcase. He looked tired, but there was a lightness in his step that hadn't been there yesterday. He looked around the empty room and let out a low whistle. "You didn't waste any time, Hal," he said, walking over to where I stood by the window. "I don't have time to waste," I replied, taking a sip of the bitter coffee. At my age, time is the only currency that matters, and I spent too much of it on people who didn't deserve it. James placed the briefcase on the kitchen island. He clicked the latches open. The sound was loud in the empty space. "I drew up the papers you asked for," he said, pulling out a thick document. "Are you absolutely sure about this, Hal? This property is appraised at $4 million. Even with the market dip, it is a significant asset. You could sell it. You could rent it out. You could live like a king on the proceeds." I looked at the papers. Deed of Gift. That was the title. "I don't want the money, James," I said. "Money is what caused this mess. Money is what rotted my son's brain. If I sell it, I am just trading one headache for another. I want this place to mean something again. I want it to serve people who understand the meaning of duty and sacrifice. People who know that you don't leave a man behind." I picked up the pen. My hand didn't shake. I felt a profound sense of clarity. The Disabled Veterans of America. I read the name of the recipient out loud. They need a rehabilitation center in this state. A place where soldiers who lost their limbs and their peace of mind can come to heal. A place with wide hallways and accessible bathrooms and quiet gardens. "I built this house to be a sanctuary," I said. "It failed as a sanctuary for my family, but maybe it can be a sanctuary for men and women who actually fought for something real." I signed my name. Harold Bennett. The signature was bold and firm, unlike the shaky forgery my son had made. James took the papers. He looked at me with respect. "You are a good man, Hal. Your wife would be proud." "I hope so," I said. "I really hope so." We shook hands. James promised to handle the filing and the transfer. He promised to make sure the Veterans Organization knew exactly who the donation came from. Not for my ego, but so they would know that this gift came from a brother in arms. I walked James to the door. When he drove away, I was truly alone. I did not linger. I did not do a final walkthrough. I didn't need to say goodbye to the drywall and the crown molding. I went to the guest house one last time. I grabbed my duffel bag. I grabbed the few shirts I had, and I grabbed the most important thing, the brass urn. I carried Martha out to my truck. The evening air was cool and smelled of impending rain. The same kind of rain that had started this whole nightmare 48 hours ago. But tonight, the rain felt different. It didn't feel oppressive. It felt cleansing. I opened the passenger door of the Ford F-150. I placed the urn gently on the seat. I strapped the seatbelt around it, just like I had done yesterday. "Well, Martha," I said, patting the lid, "we are technically homeless now." Homeless and landless. I climbed into the driver's seat. The old spring squeaked a familiar greeting. I looked at the dashboard. The fuel gauge was full. The engine temperature was normal. "Where should we go?" I asked the silence. I remembered a conversation we had 5 years ago, right before she got sick. We were watching a documentary about the Grand Canyon. She had squeezed my hand and said, "Hal, one day when you retire, I want to see the sun rise over the painted desert. I want to see colors that aren't gray and green." I promised her we would go, but then life happened. Cancer happened. The grief happened. And then the drama with Brian happened. I had broken that promise. Not anymore. I started the engine. The truck rumbled to life, shaking the frame. It was a rough, unrefined sound, but to me, it sounded like freedom. I put the truck in gear and drove down the long driveway. I passed the spot where the floral arch had stood. The crushed flowers were gone, swept away by the wind. I passed the spot where the police cruiser had parked. I passed the spot where Tiffany had started her long walk of shame. I didn't look back in the rearview mirror. I didn't look at the house standing dark and empty on the hill. I kept my eyes on the road ahead. The headlights cut through the twilight, illuminating the wet asphalt. I turned right onto the main road, heading toward the interstate. I was leaving behind a legacy of bricks and mortar, but I was taking with me a legacy of integrity. I had lost a son. That pain would never fully go away. It would sit in my chest like a dull ache on rainy days. But I had saved myself. I had refused to be a victim. I had stood up for the man I was and the man I wanted to be. And Brian. Well, Brian was where he needed to be. Maybe in the silence of a prison cell, stripped of his gadgets and his gambling apps, he would finally find the person he was supposed to be. Or maybe he wouldn't. That was no longer my responsibility. My job was done. I reached over and rested my hand on the urn. The metal was cool under my palm. "We are going to Arizona, Em," I whispered. "We are going to see the sunrise. And then maybe we will go to Florida. Maybe we will drive all the way to Key West. We have time. We have all the time in the world." I merged onto the highway. The city lights of Seattle twinkled in the distance, shrinking with every mile. I turned on the radio. An old country song was playing. I hummed along. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like an old man. I felt like a traveler. I felt light. The road stretched out before me, endless and full of possibility. I pressed the gas pedal, and the old truck surged forward, carrying me away from the past and into a future that was finally mine to choose. Lesson learned from this story. The most painful betrayal often comes not from enemies, but from the very people you sacrificed everything to build up. Harold's story teaches us that family is defined by behavior, not biology. Enabling a child's toxicity out of guilt or obligation is not love. It is a slow poison that destroys both the parent and the child. True dignity lies in knowing when to draw a line, when to say no, and when to walk away, to protect your own peace. You cannot buy respect, but you can certainly lose it by tolerating abuse. Never let anyone, even your own children, make you feel worthless in the kingdom you built. If you enjoyed this story of justice and redemption, Please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories about standing up for yourself. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that it is never too late to take back your life. Tell me in the comments, have you ever had to make a tough choice to cut off a toxic family member? I read every single comment. See you in the next video.